Our reading today is from John O'Donohue, "To bless this space between us." In out-of-the-way places of the heart, where your thoughts never think to wander, this beginning has been quietly forming, waiting until you were ready to emerge. For a long time, it has watched your desire, feeling the emptiness growing inside you, noticing how you willed yourself on, still unable to leave what you had outgrown. It watched you play with the seduction of safety and the gray promises that sameness whispered, heard the waves of turmoil rise and relent, wondered would you always live like this? Then the delight, when your courage kindled and out you stepped onto new ground. Your eyes young again with energy and dream, a path of plenitude opening before you. Though your destination is not clear, you can trust the promise of this opening. Unfurl yourself into the grace of this beginning. This is at one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure. Hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk. Soon you will be home in a new rhythm, for your soul senses the world that awaits you. So as we know, this Community Church Unitarian Universalist, is a self-sustaining congregation. That means the work that we do both within our sanctuary walls, which we are not currently in, and outside our sanctuary walls, our support financially, as well as all that we do in the world, helps us continue as a community, as a church, as a faithful body. Now more than ever, we deeply appreciate the continued care and the continued support for this community so that we can continue to do more and be more together. And so, to give, you will see in the chat box the information. You can, of course, give online at ccuu.nola.org/stewardship or by text at 504-370-2659. Text GIVE to be prompted to make your donation. You can also send a check to CCUU at 6690 Fleur-de-Lis Drive, New Orleans, Louisiana, 70124. And now, in this time, let us listen to our beautiful offertory on Posen. Our final reading today is from Reverend Peter Gomes from the Good Book. There is in Celtic mythology the notion of thin places in the universe where the visible and the invisible world come into their closest proximity. To seek such places is the vocation of the wise and the good. And for those that find them, the clearest communication between the temporal and eternal. Mountains and rivers are particularly favored as thin places, marking invariably as they do the horizontal and perpendicular frontiers. But perhaps the ultimate of these thin places in the human condition are the experiences humans are likely to have as they encounter suffering, joy, and mystery. So I don't know about you, but the other day, my family and I needed some physically distanced time out of the house. So we took a drive down St. Bernard, across the bridge to the lower Ninth Ward, out past the refinery plants in Araby, all the way to the bayous in Chalmette. The drive, all in all, was about 40 minutes. However, given the sack full of toys, activities, and snacks that my 5-year-old packed for the trip, you would think we were on a 40-day pilgrimage. COVID-19, among many other things, has altered our vision of travel. A vast journey is now within an hour's reach. And journeys that are farther afield across the world are currently out of reach. Don't you try to get on that international flight. But today I actually want us to take a journey, if only in our minds, to ancient Ireland. Because it was here in Celtic mythology, before the arrival of Christianity, that the understanding of thin places, a portal between two worlds, where the divine and earthly meet, came into being. In the Celtic tradition, thin places were often in and among the natural world. The fairy grove just steps from the village. The hill of Tara catching divine light just right on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. Eventually, those thin places evolved to not be a portal just between the divine and human world, but also an energy, a feeling that was in this world, but not of this world. I think we do thin places quite a bit here in New Orleans, where the veil between the living and the dead is particularly thin. Just walk around the French Quarter, but not yet, and you'll see apartments purporting to be haunted, museums dedicated to Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen who conjured up thin places in her religious practices, above-ground cemeteries where the living and the dead are quite literally on the same footing. But there's more than just mythology in our thin places in New Orleans. We are a particularly thin place because we have also endured so much as a city, physically, emotionally, spiritually. From the natural disasters of Hurricane Betsy and Katrina to the very human-made sin of becoming a major port for the US slave trade, New Orleans has encountered death and sorrow and come out of these times, oddly and often, embracing a full range of emotions too. Joy, revelry, resilience. Though our waistlines may grow from delicious food, New Orleans itself, often jolted out of complacency and comfort through experience, has often crossed the threshold into a thin place of the human condition that Reverend Peter Gomes wrote about. And so that's what I want us all to explore today, wherever we are. I'm going to say most likely in our homes, from what I see, the ways in which we, in this time, are all crossing thresholds into thinner places, where we, jolted out of our day-to-day comfort, more readily access our spiritual and emotional lives. So the question is, once we have crossed the threshold to our own thin places, can we stay long enough, even when it's hard, to transform into something new? To let the divine, however we see it, do its work in moving us toward our next journey, our next threshold. Unless we think the Irish, or us New Orleanians, have a monopoly on thin places, this understanding of the divine and earthly meeting is in almost every religious tradition. In the Hindu tradition, Hindu temples are quite literally considered duplications of the cosmos, down to mathematical exactitude. Temples are the places where the gods worshipped, and the people who worship the gods commune. Synagogues, churches, and mosques hold this sacred thin space as well. From the dome of St. Peter's Basilica to the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, considered the holiest place on earth for Muslim. The divine is present with these worshipers. And yet, for the magnificence of these places, there is space too, in these same traditions, for deeply intimate, thin places, with no need for lavish construction. Instead, they are held up by a simple spiritual scaffolding, us. Thin places from many religious traditions are often at the thresholds of our homes, fitting for this quarantine time. So in the Jewish tradition, the mezuzah is affixed to doorposts to remind Jewish people, as writer Nina Amir notes, that God is one with them, and that God asks them to live in a certain manner and by certain laws or rules. Touching the mezuzah in passing, when leaving the house or entering, also reminds them that the Torah offers instructions for living. It actually tells Jews how to actualize their human potential, how to have good relationships, and how to find happiness, meaning, and fulfillment. In Hinduism, the half-man, half-elephant god Ganesh stands in a particular placement at the threshold of many Hindu homes, bringing auspiciousness, luck. Yet Ganesh's presence and the reminder of Jewish laws at one's doorpost isn't simply about keeping luck and religious security in the home. In many traditions, there's also a welcoming into our homes and our lives for all that life may bring. So there is an image often of Ganesha's protruding belly, as charming as it is, which holds a deeper religious significance. In life, we will face both joy and sorrow. Ganesha, through his protruding belly, reminds us to digest it all. It's a little ironic, especially for us COVID-19 overindulgers, that I use an expanding belly as a metaphor for getting to a thin place, where we emotionally let in, as a spiritual practice, all that life brings us. As Christian theologian Marcus Borg writes, a thin place is anywhere our hearts are opened. There are places where the boundary between the two levels become very soft, porous, permeable. Thin places are places where the veil momentarily lifts and we behold the awe of the divine all around us and in us. And our homes, our hearts, must be where we begin our journey to thin places. So on my church office desk, which I haven't seen for a while, there's an old Irish phrase etched in stone. Bidden or not bidden, God is present. I haven't been able to bring this plaque home, but it stays with me all the same as I worship with y'all from my living room. Because while I might not look it, I, like many of you, are in a thin place where the divine seems closer than ever before. As I come close to bringing a new life into the world, as I support those who are encountering death and dying in this time, as I consider who we are as a religious people, as a community, as a country, my heart at times feels ragged and thin. And yet it also comes sore and broken, closer to what is authentic, what is real. A life lived, not only in gladness, but in sorrow too, in empathy and in recognition of the whole of the human condition. This is where the divine finds a place in us. In front of our own door, my husband and I have an art piece with a blessing on the back, also traditionally understood as a Jewish prayer. Let no sorrow come through this gate. Let no trouble come in this dwelling. Let no fright come through this door. Let no conflict come to this department. Let there be blessing and peace in this place. As beautiful as this prayer is, and as much as I always want it to be true, there is actually no threshold that can stop sorrow, even in the happiest of homes. My comfortable bed is where I wept after a miscarriage 2 years ago. My backyard is where I build elaborate cardboard kingdoms with my son. My sink is where my husband and I jokingly dispute whose turn it is to do the dishes. Each of these places leaves a memory, a thin place where the divine touches the mundane. If my house still stands in 100 years, I like to think that those memories, that molecular energy, if you will be felt by others too. And though I may not consider all that has occurred a blessing, I do know that who I am, the person I have become, is informed by all of it, all the rooms of my heart. I cannot choose just one or two joyful pieces to make up the whole of my spiritual self. The richness of my life experience in sickness and in health has brought me to a thin place of deeper connection with not only the divine, but with the rest of humanity as well. I wonder, as you look about your own home, what would you bless it with? What would you bless your life with? Would your wish always to be free from suffering, always comfortable, always full? Or might you too consider a life that makes space for the thin places? For some of us, there are the thin places we may seek out in our religious sanctuaries or our social justice work, where we move ourselves out of our comfort and narrow perspective. I'm reminded of my time as a hospital chaplain. In sterile hospital rooms, I witnessed people dying, holding their hands as they passed from this world to somewhere else, I know not where. The energy and sorrow and sometimes relief that was present, even as my skeptic's mind pushed against it, was a thin place. And there are the thin places that find us in our own times of vulnerability, tragedy, and jubilation. Bidden or not bidden, God, or however you see the divine or that which is larger than us, is present. This time in the world, this time in our homes, this time in our lives is thin, not meager, but porous. It's a time where we have the opportunity to turn from complacency, the numbing of all that is rising up within us, and instead move toward inviting deeper spiritual contemplation, activism, and empathy into our lives. Going through that metaphorical thin portal and mindfully traveling on that lifelong spiritual journey to which all Unitarian Universalists are called. So on my family's own epic 40-minute road trip last weekend, the Deep Bayou reminded me a bit of my time in Ireland many years ago, where I traveled from Galway to the Giant's Causeway in the north. There are places there that the veil felt particularly thin. But in this bayou, we don't hear tales of fairies in the Louisiana bayou, yet somehow I still felt, I almost want to call it a more modern thin place amidst the Chalmette lush greenery. Because to reach this place of beauty was to drive past multiple refineries that fueled my car and where overuse was destroying the very land on which they sat. It was to reach a road closed sign that signaled the end of the habitable bayou, a sign that continues to move further toward land as we in Louisiana lose a football field of wetland every hour. This place, just minutes from here, felt thin because it encompassed so much of what we are struggling with today in our country. Economic needs over the health and safety of human beings. The beauty of the natural world contrasted with the fuel that keeps our modern lives running. It was thin. It was everything. I would have noticed this thin place less a few months ago, when my heart was just a bit less weighted down by sorrow for our country's current state. I would have appreciated this thin place less when I had the opportunity to see the outside world more. But in this thin place, I see it now. In its natural beauty, the joy and jubilation for that, as well as the tragedy of its human disregard for life, plant and animal. I see it in its thinness, and I will continue to carry it with me. So I'm not sure where any of these thin places in my heart, in my home, in my community are leading me, or leading any of us at this moment. But I do hope we can abide in thin places a bit longer, that we try not to numb them, block them, or deny them altogether in the weeks and months to come. A thin place is inviting us to journey somewhere new in our spiritual and emotional lives and contemplation. Let us walk through its threshold, blessed with a hard and beautiful life worth living. Amen. Before we begin our benediction, I want to thank each and every one of you for your caring, your love, and your showing up. Amidst all the imperfection, I appreciate you being here to share in a deeper spiritual connection today. And for those of you who would like to continue to connect, after our worship today, we will close out this Zoom. Please go to your Zoom link in Community Matters, and Dion DeVille, CCU President, will be leading our coffee hour starting at 12:30 p.m. Again, thank you so much, Dion. And for others who would like to help support her in this work, please reach out to us at office@ccunola.org. It is a joy to be with you all today. And I leave you with this benediction by Henry Frederic Ariel. Ready for any seed the winds may bring. Let mystery have its place in you. Leave a little fallow corner in your heart, ready for any seeds the wind may bring. And reserve a nook of shadow for the passing bird. Keep a place in your heart for the unexpected guests. An altar for an unknown God. Go in peace and go in love.